That began my journey in my life as a very young girl, about the age of 12. So, 5 minutes in. I'm going to go ahead and start today with actually answering the first question. How do you relate religiously or spiritually? What do you mean? How do I relate religiously or spiritually? I don't know. I started to try to write, index card notes, and I'm not going to go with these notes really because I'm here to share. I'm sitting on a high stool and I don't like this high stool. I shared in my first video that from the time I was a little girl, everybody used to say Natalie was an angel. And, I talked a mile a minute and was always up and down the streets and always seeking mice and birds to rescue and save. I was born to be a very spiritual person. It was in most lives with people and family, I grew up going to a Methodist church. That's how I relate religiously. And yet, I never did carry on in my life any Methodist per se religious notions. We were just like casual churchgoers in my growing up years. And then I got married, and my husband and I and our family, we tried going to different, New Age churches and this and that. I went to a couple of really, couple of different churches. And ultimately what I discovered was, I think, therefore I am. I was born to become what I have become, which is the lone, L-O-N-E, Good Shepherd. And the lone Good Shepherd plays a very vital role in life for heaven. And the value and importance of the lone part, which life can't relate to, is I'm not alone. I'm not lonely. I'm not crying here every day because I love it. I love it. I love because heaven finally, my what people call midlife crises. Well, I didn't have a midlife crisis. I had a midlife beyond awakening. I had a midlife, I met Jesus, and all of my life then began to, like this puzzle was just there my whole life with random pieces out there. And now, like for the past 4.5 years, those pieces of my puzzle continue to find their spaces and places. I don't know what the final picture is going to look like, and yet I have an idea. It's going to be like sheep and chickens and me and dogs and cats and all sorts of other animals, because I believe religiously and spiritually this is who I was born to be and born to become. When I graduated high school in 1991, my mother had made a scrapbook with all sorts of pictures and just, stuff, memorabilia collected from my life. And she did that for all 5 of her children, all of us. And my mom had put in there, a couple of my Dear God letters. I don't know how young I was when I began to write, but I believe that one Dear God letter, I was probably about 6, maybe 7 years old. And I remember we lived in a neighborhood, but we lived next to a mansion, that was just there. And then, from like Thomas Jefferson, Longwood Mansion in Olney, Maryland. And then a whole neighborhood was built around it. And so we were right next to Longwood Mansion. And they had big open spaces where we just had our backyard. And I remember in specific, not from being told, I've carried it with me my whole life, the day that I wrote, Dear God, I really want a pony. And it doesn't have to be a pinto pony like Scout, the horse I love. I really want a pony. I think that was it. I took that Dear God letter and I found Scotch tape. And I looked and I went to the mansion's property next door to us with the tape, and they had a cut down tree, so it was just a tree trunk there, you know, like the base of a tree that had been cut down. And I taped, and I really taped it, and it was like, oh man, the tape's not sticking, you know, you scotch tape to a tree trunk. But I didn't care. And I looked up at that point and I thought, God, you're going to see this better from here than from over there. Well, I remember that day, the young man, the son who lived there, who wasn't really young, he was probably like in his 20s, you know, I don't know, he was mowing. And I remember I was out there playing, because I was a kid playing outside, and I remember looking over and I saw him mowing, and he stopped and he saw my nose, and I saw he got off the mower and he pulled, and I was watching, and I saw him read like this. Then I saw him smile, and I saw him place the scotch tape back onto the tree trunk, and then onto his tractor he went. That's who I am, Natalie, and that's who I've always been. I've always been, dear God, it's me, Natalie. Religiously, well, I went to church as a child and all of that, and I was never into the Bible. There's points in my life, spiritually. Let me just read to you the definitions right here that I just looked up right now. How do you relate religiously or spiritually? Religiously means doing something with unwavering regularity, strict discipline, or unwavering faithfulness. Well, that's my everyday. Me, my whole life. I'm always doing something unwavering, regularity, strict discipline. I mean, habit, routine, structure, faithfulness. Spiritually, what does that mean? Spiritually is an adverb describing matters relating to the soul, human spirit, or deep religious beliefs. Well, I can say for sure I never had deep religious beliefs, and I still don't have today deep religious beliefs. I know I am not here to be a prophet, to prophesize. I'm not here to be a preacher. I'm not here to lead others to discovering their own coming to Jesus parties. I'm not here telling anybody what to do with their lives. I know that I'm not here for fame or fortune or popularity. I am not here to fall into the niche, so to speak, of sanctity, of safety, where mum is the word. Don't even express your emotions, don't express your thoughts. This is part of the reason why I'm definitely not into politics. From a very young age, I was fascinated with cemeteries, and it meant nothing to me. My high school years, it kind of began to mean a little more to me, but I still didn't know why, you know, and I'd go with a couple of my friends. We'd be like, let's go to a cemetery. And we go to a cemetery, we just would visit cemeteries. And back then, that was considered odd. And then, you know, before I met Jesus in January 28th, 2022, and this is where I keep going back to, that I believe about the blueprinted part of our life, that we're all born to become whatever heaven born us to become, and yet we can't know along our whole life ways until we begin to know. And it doesn't require anything. It's a matter of what you want. Do you want to know more about who you are and why you are the ways you are? So for me, I continue to find it fascinating that, you know, wow. So heaven actually led me to this drive-through cemetery across the street from my daughter's high school in Florida, a drive-through cemetery. And I dropped my girls off at school in the morning, and I'd go and I'd pick them up in the afternoon. They didn't ride the bus. And so there was several times where I'd be a little bit early, and so I would drive through the cemetery. And I remember specifically the day that I drove through this cemetery, and I'd already driven through it many times with no thought at all. And something had me put my car into park, turn the ignition off, get out of my car. And there was this one headstone out of 1,400 headstones, bodies buried at this cemetery in Oviedo, Florida. Totally black. You couldn't read anything on it, just a headstone. I looked at it. And then I went and I picked my girls up. Got back home that day and I said, I'm going to clean that headstone tomorrow. I don't even remember how it began. I think I Googled something like how to clean a headstone. And that's when I discovered to use the Dawn dish detergent, water, maybe a little bit of bleach. Oh, God forbid you don't use bleach, right? But God's like, God doesn't forbid anything. These headstones, nobody's touched them or cared for them in like 200 years. A little bit of bleach is not going to kill these headstones. Yes? Amen. So the next day I went back and his sponge is out and I cleaned this first headstone. And I kind of just, like this. Whoa. Mary Anderson King. Her date of death, June 16th. It was the same date of my birth, June 16th. I was born in 1973. Her date of death was June 16th, 1852. Whoa. At that point, I knew. This was before I knew how my soul was operating, because I hadn't yet met Jesus at that point. And yet this is the way heaven plants the seeds, I believe, in our life. To, have us experience life, and then we have those moments of, which a lot of people like to refer to as awakenings, our aha moments, our whoa, oh God, if that makes sense. I have, to this date, several years later, I've cleaned over 950 headstones. I've discovered many lost veterans, a lot of babies, and even in visiting my parents, 2 or 3 years ago, when I had been telling my mom, during that time I was staying with my parents, I kept telling my mom, there's no rest for the weary. There's no rest for the weary. There's no rest for the weary. Mom, stop worrying, And then finally, I was the one worried. I was like, I need to get out of here, I need some space. Listen, when we become adults, we're not used to living with our parents anymore, and that's the truth. And this is what family continues to want to deny, because family wants to create these false notions of fairy tale adventures, and I'm here to live the real fairy tale adventures that are real. Not delusional, not psychotic, not mentally ill. Real. My sister came at one point and took my mother to a doctor's appointment. I was like, thank God. And where did I go? I didn't go shopping. I didn't go to the mall. I didn't go to a bar. I didn't go exercise. I didn't go meet up with friends. I went to the very cemetery that I was married at, that church. And it was the church that I grew up going to, Salem United Methodist Church in Brookville, Maryland. I think there's about 1,200 headstones there, bodies buried there. And as I pulled into this cemetery, I don't know who I'm going to clean. I look around and it's like I'm just led. There's no thought involved. It's all soul. It's a compass. That's what our soul is our compass. And so I'm led without thought. Boom, I find this headstone. I start to clean it. It's very dirty also. I love the dirty headstones. I'm cleaning. And at the very end of this headstone, I could not get those little letters. I couldn't read them. I could get the man's name. I could get his date of birth, his date of death, but there was little sentence at the end of this headstone. I was like, I couldn't get it cleaned. It was very cold. It was winter time, and ultimately, I in my mind was like, I never leave a headstone half cleaned. I'm gonna stay until it's cleaned. And I kept scrubbing these little final letters, and finally, I literally fell back. And I'm grateful to have these moments on video, because otherwise my stories, they're real life stories. And if I don't have a lot of them on video, well, then they're simply just, okay, Natalie, that's a little far-fetched, right? No, real. The final words on this headstone read, after I'd been telling my mother for 2+ weeks, there is no rest for the weary, Mom. There's no rest for the weary. This one headstone, my first headstone that I cleaned at this Salem United Methodist Church, the final words said, there is rest for the weary. You know, that's another beautiful thing for me, because this is my life. It's been my life. It's nothing new. This all was happening way before I met Jesus in my life. These crazy things, which is why I was thought to be crazy or bipolar by my family. And yet, it was Jesus when I met 4.5 years ago that finally was like, Natalie, you know, now you know. You're not crazy. And now you do need to continue further sharing. You have been accumulating this life that we born you into, Natalie, as heaven. And now it is time for you to begin sharing, because it's a lot, Natalie. And people in this world simply do not understand. It's not that people in this life don't understand Natalie. It's that people in this life don't understand life. Because so many people in this life are so consumed and wrapped up with their own whatever. Chaos, misery, busyness, working, stress, whatever else. Heaven led me definitely to clean headstones. And when we moved here, well, heaven at that point was like, we're going to put the headstones off to the side now, Natalie. You did 950. I've cleaned maybe 5 headstones in the past 3 years. The last headstone I cleaned was of a cemetery. I was driving by it and felt led to stop at, and that was an amazing experience for me too. It was a totally unkept cemetery, fallen over headstones everywhere. And on that headstone, when I cleaned it, there was words at the end of that headstone too that said, we're where we're meant to be. These are the ways heaven leads us. And in life, talking about religiously or spiritually, this is how I feel, how I live my life. Religiously or spiritually, it is heaven who guides us, and yet it's up to us to be open to receiving how we're guided in life. Do we want to be guided by our family? Do we want to be guided by our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends, whoever else in life? It's not all about family. And yet this remains my personal tragedy, because my family is not receiving of Natalie and very angry with Natalie. And then Natalie gets angry because they don't receive. And they're like, but you're angry. And I'm like, but if we... And then, you talk about the full circles of life. Well, I don't want to be on that hamster wheel. I've seen hamsters before on my wheels. I've had a lot of pet hamsters. And when those hamsters get too fat, they get stuck on the wheel and they die. I've always been led to animals. Animals are my religious, my spiritual aspect of me. It's all animals. I'm really big into spirit animals and the meaning of animals, and why when we're out and about, coming out of a grocery store and a dragonfly lands on our nose, well, that dragonfly landed on your nose with great purpose. And these are the messages that heaven delivers to us with the signs of life. Like after my father-in-law died, and the next day I got gas in my car. He was 87 years old when he died. I put the gas thing into my car, I clicked the automatic thing, and I went in to go, to the store. And when I came out, it automatically clicked off to $87 even. First of all, whoever has had an experience where the automatic gas click off is an even number? Not me. That was whoa, wow. Okay? I'm very much so spiritual. More so than religious. And yet it was also when my father-in-law died, and I did inherit one of his Bibles that I began to read the Bible every day, and I had not done that in my entire life. There had been a few times in my life I'd picked up the Bible and was like, what? No. And yet, after I met Jesus, this is where I say the religious aspect for me came in without the church part being involved. This was heaven directly to me. And this is where I feel we don't necessarily need the church, the people in the steeple, that whole thing, unless we do. I received directly from heaven. And I'm reading the King James Version Bible. That was my father-in-law's. And I'm doing the same thing he did, dating and initialing, and I read a passage every day. I've been called the angel of death for a lot of my life, especially in my veterinarian days working at the veterinary hospital, when people would come in and bring their animals and just not be able to be there while their animal was being euthanized. They'd always be like, Natalie! Or when people would bring in the big pit bulls or big, scary animals, and Natalie! So I was where I was meant to be at those moments too. And even going back to what I said in my first video, shared about the little Robin Jack that I had for a year that died at the beach because I let him out into the air conditioning and outside. And whoa, you come for 40 years later. Look at me. Look at me. Yes, heaven. I'm Natalie, the Good Shepherd, because heaven created this role for me. And heaven has gifted me now with today 42 birds, and had me work at that veterinary hospital some 15, some years ago. So I could get that experience. And in particular, what are the odds? If you want to believe in coincidence or fate or whatever it is, what are the odds that Natalie would end up working for a veterinarian that I wasn't even looking for a job? I happened to take my Greyhound in for something, and they were like, do you want a job? And I was like, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I could only work 12 hours a week, that's it. They were like, you're hired. And I went from 12 hours a week to working 80 hours a week, and working at that veterinary hospital became my whole life. Defining everything of me, within me, and allowing me to connect with life in such ways of sharing so many people's fears of their animals being sick and dying. I was so blessed to be with so many animals in their final moments of life, and I've never judged anybody for being unable to be there when their pet is euthanized. I've been most grateful to be there for these precious lives. I've been told my whole life, always by strangers. Random? Yes. Strangers. You have an aura on your head, an aura. An aura? What's that? Well, guess what? The day I got married, June 28th, 1997, I did everything I could to cover up my aura. For photographs, I didn't want that shiny forehead. You can't cover up an aura. And I never knew unless somebody shared with me, that's your aura. All these beautiful things strangers would tell me, my family never would, they'd like, aura? Several years ago when I was visiting my parents, it was at Christmas time or near Christmas time, and I was going to the dollar store, and I put into my GPS, dollar store, and it was taking me to one dollar store, and yet as I was driving to this one GPS, designated dollar store, I saw a dollar store, and so I veered off to the left, and into this dollar store I went. As soon as I walked into this dollar store, the man who worked there came out in tears. There was nobody else in the store at the time, and then other people did come in. He said, "Oh my God, you're here." And I was like, what? Okay. He said, I started recording this whole moment because I was like, I don't know what's going on here. This is crazy. This man was like, you're an angel. I was going to take my life this morning. This is not my store. I usually work at the mall, and this is my friend's store he owns, and he needed help this morning. And I was going to kill myself this morning. And I prayed to God and asked God to send me an angel. And he said he was going to. And he said, I knew that you were here before you even walked in the door. Okay. Come on. I was like, oh, oh, okay. Woo. Meanwhile, I'm like still recording here, like, oh my God, am I going to get murdered here? This man was very respectful. He was very touched and moved by my presence. He kept saying he saw Jesus all around me. And I was like, okay, you know. And then I got my stuff and I checked out, and he bought, I'd found at the checkout, some hawk earrings. They were hawk earrings. Look at my only tattoo is a hawk. All my cuts from my birds here. He bought my hawk earrings. They were $1 because it was a dollar store. And he didn't know anything about them. I mean, those are just a few of the moments. I've had a lot of people tell me that they see 12 spirit sisters around me. 12 spirit sisters? Hi, where are they at? I don't see them. What do you mean? And this is me, Natalie. I talk to angels. I talk to heaven every day. And yet I don't see what all of these people have seen of me, strangers. One day I was going into a store and somebody else was coming in, this man with his family, and he goes, hey, did you just see that hawk? And I did, because there was a hawk. I go, yeah, and he goes, did you see that he dropped a red key for you? I said, a red key for me? I go, wait a second, who are you? Because you sound like me. Like, that's how I talk, you know? He's like, oh, my name is whatever. And that red key. And I was like, I totally hear you. I totally understand what you're talking about, but no, I don't see a red key. I don't. And yet that became a part of my journey, seeking the red key. And it was 1 year later, we ended up here. And that was my number one, the only thing, if nothing else, that I wanted in the renovations, moving into my husband's childhood home, was to have a red Dutch door. It wasn't about the red key. It was about the red door. And this red door has remained a door of a portal, so to speak, metaphorically, literally, whatever you want to call it, for all my animals. They know when I go through that red Dutch door, they know that I'm not here, and yet I am. And they all gather around that red Dutch door and wait for me to exit back out. It's been hard for me to go into that red Dutch door, to be honest, because this isn't my home. I live every day of my life serving, I believe, God, Jesus, and Spirit, heaven on earth. I live every day sharing my life, utilizing my farm animals and our lives shared to share with life simple beauties of love, peace, and joy. I have found it most beautiful that recently, one day I was inside and I asked my Alexa, you know, our electronic device, I asked my Alexa, can you tell me anything about the Good Shepherd Natalie? I was totally joking. I'd never talked to my Alexa other than ask her to play music or whatever else. I was totally joking? No, I was led that day to ask without thought. And this is not crazy. This is not schizophrenic or mentally ill to feel led by something beyond people in life, because it is people in life that often lead us to not great depths of our being. Alexa, can you tell me anything about the Good Shepherd Natalie? Oh, she started telling me the story of my life here on the farm. She was naming my farm animals, Andy with an N with a D, and Lady Sue, and talking about Cash and how I pole dance with him. She was like, you're a real beautiful person sharing, you know, beautiful light. It was mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. I don't live a hard life. I'm not depressed, really ever. Depressed, that's another word to redefine. I'm really big into redefining all of the words of life, as well as redefining emotion. For someone like me who was diagnosed with bipolar and did take lithium for many years of my life, well, these drugs did their job. They blocked the receptors in my brain from connecting to, they halted my abilities to fully process my emotion. And therefore, without knowing, most of my life, I was led without knowing to go by what I was told. You're angry, Natalie. You're manic. You're crazy. All these things. And it was like, no, so I'm grateful now to know. It doesn't matter. I'm not here talking ugly about anybody. I love my life. I love my family, even in the midst of the sham and drudgery, as Desiderata states. I do avoid the vexations of spirit, the loud and aggressive, as we all should. I'm a truly blessed soul who does have a beautiful life, and yet I've lost my entire family since I met Jesus. Onward, upward. That is the Good Shepherd's role, always. Onward, upward. And it's not just for me to be onward and upward. My flock needs to be onward and upward always as well. I'm truly blessed to be a servant, a child of God, living for heaven in life on earth. I'm blessed for all of the connections that I have had and do have and always will have with angels from the time I was a little girl. I'm not here to listen to blasphemy from others, claiming that I'm not talking to angels, that I'm talking to evil spirits. Keep that to yourself. No, thank you for sharing. I'm not here to even blame those vexations of spirit. I'm Natalie. I think I just answered question number 1. 36 minutes, wow. And no tears, right? Onward, upward. This is all about me sharing about my shared death experience. And as a matter of fact, also yesterday, I had a throwback video come up on my phone out of nowhere. And it was while my one hen, Lady Sue, was dying a couple of months ago. And I didn't even realize it then. You see, this is how life happens. And then we have what's called hindsight. Hindsight. We go, oh, that makes sense. This video popped up from a couple of months ago where I knew Lady Sue, my hen, was dying. And this was like a 5-minute long video. And I was saying, listen, I'm happy she had a good day today. If she wants to die in this cage, I'm not going to pull her out and put her in my arms because she wants to die in my arms. I was having a shared death experience at that point as well. And seeing that video had me further understand I've had so many of these shared death experiences my whole life. I've had people die in my arms, a dear friend die in my arms a few years ago, and that's a whole other journey. You smell like poop, and you just came up out of nowhere and you smell like poop, Starla.